I was sitting on the cold concrete floor of our apartment hallway at 2 in the morning, my back pressed against the front door of my own home, wearing scrubs that still smelled like antiseptic and someone else's blood. My phone was at 4%. My coat was inside. The temperature in that hallway couldn't have been more than 50 degrees because the building's heating system had been broken for a week, and management kept saying they'd fix it tomorrow. Through the door, I could hear my mother-in-law's television. She was watching some late-night talk show, volume cranked up, laughing at something the host said. She knew I was out here. She'd looked through the peephole. I saw the shadow shift, and then she walked away. I called my husband for the 11th time. This time, he picked up. "Brandon," I whispered, my voice cracking, "please, tell your mom to open the door. I've been out here for 3 hours." He laughed. Not a nervous laugh, not an uncomfortable laugh, a real, genuine, amused laugh, like I'd just told him the funniest joke he'd heard all week. "Ash, come on. Mom told you dinner was at 7. You walked in at 7:05. You know how she is about punctuality. It's your own fault." "I'm sleeping in a hallway, Brandon. In a hallway. I live here. My name is on the lease. Just crash in your car. It's not that serious. We'll talk in the morning." He hung up. I stared at the phone screen until it went black. 4% became 3. I pulled my knees to my chest and pressed my forehead against them. And I made a decision right there on that filthy hallway floor. A decision that, 12 hours later, would leave both of them standing in an empty apartment with their mouths hanging open, wondering what the hell just happened. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning, to when I still believed this marriage was something worth saving. I met Brandon Holloway at a friend's barbecue in Cedar Falls, Iowa, 3 summers ago. I was 26, fresh out of nursing school, working double shifts at Mercy General to pay off $47,000 in student loans. He was 29, working as a project manager at a mid-sized construction company, and he had this way of looking at you like you were the only person at the party. He brought me a plate of food before I even asked. Brisket, coleslaw, cornbread, a little cup of baked beans on the side. "You look like you haven't eaten today," he said, handing it over with a grin. He was right. I'd come straight from a 12-hour shift. I hadn't eaten since a granola bar at 6 a.m. "Is it that obvious?" I asked. "You keep staring at the grill like it owes you money," he said. "I'm Brandon." Ashley. We talked for 4 hours that night. He walked me to my car. He didn't try to kiss me, didn't ask for my number in some sleazy way. He just said, "I'd really like to see you again, Ashley. Can I take you to dinner this week?" Polite, respectful, old-fashioned in the good way. Our first date was at a little Italian place called Rosario's on 5th Street. He held the door, pulled out my chair, asked me real questions about my life, my family, my dreams. I told him about growing up in a single-parent household, my mom working 2 jobs to keep us fed, how I'd put myself through school because there was no college fund, no safety net. He listened like every word mattered. "My mom raised me the same way," he said, "just the 2 of us after my dad left. She sacrificed everything for me. She's my whole world." I thought that was beautiful. A man who loved his mother, a man who understood loyalty and sacrifice. I remember thinking, this is the kind of man you build a life with. We dated for 8 months. He was attentive, kind, generous. He'd surprise me with flowers after a rough shift. He'd rub my feet while we watched movies on his couch. He told me he loved me on a Tuesday night while we were doing dishes together. Nothing fancy, no grand gesture, just the truth spoken over soapy water and a sink full of plates. "I love you, Ash. I think I've loved you since the barbecue." I said it back because I meant it. He proposed 6 months later on a bridge overlooking the Cedar River at sunset. Simple ring, nothing flashy, a 1/4-carat diamond on a white gold band. He'd saved for it. I didn't care about the size. I cared about the man kneeling in front of me with tears in his eyes. "I want to spend my life with you," he said. "Will you let me?" "Yes," I said, 1,000 times yes. We got married at the county courthouse because neither of us could afford a big wedding. I wore a white sundress from Target, He wore a navy suit he'd borrowed from his buddy Marcus. We had lunch at Rosario's afterward, just the two of us, splitting a bottle of cheap champagne and a tiramisu. It was perfect. The first sign of trouble came exactly 2 weeks after the wedding, when Brandon told me his mother was moving in. Just for a little while, he said. We were unpacking boxes in our new apartment, a 2-bedroom unit on Maple Drive, $1,350 a month, both our names on the lease. Her landlord sold the building. She's got nowhere to go. How long is a little while? I asked. Month or 2, 3 tops, just until she finds a new place. I loved Brandon. I wanted to support him. His mother, Karen Holloway, was 61 years old, retired from a secretary position at a law firm, living on Social Security and a small pension. She needed help. I understood that. Of course, I said. She's family. Karen moved in on a Saturday. She arrived with a U-Haul full of furniture, 3 boxes of kitchen supplies, a porcelain cat collection that took up an entire bookshelf, and a framed 8x10 photo of Brandon at age 6 that she hung in the living room before she even said hello to me. The guest room is too small, she announced, standing in the doorway of the second bedroom with her arms crossed. Brandon, honey, can you move that desk out? And I'll need blackout curtains. The morning light gives me migraines. I looked at Brandon. He was already nodding. Sure, Mom, whatever you need. That desk was mine. I used it to study for my nursing certifications, to organize patient notes, to pay bills. Brandon carried it down to the storage unit in the basement without asking me. It's temporary, he said when he saw my face. I let it go. The first week, Karen rearranged the kitchen. She moved my spice rack, reorganized the pantry, threw out my nonstick pans because she said they were toxic, and replaced them with her cast iron set that weighed about 40 pounds each. She changed the brand of coffee we bought. She put a lace doily on the back of the couch. I'm just making it feel like home, she told me, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The second week, she started commenting on my cooking. That's a lot of salt, Ashley. You're overcooking the pasta, dear. In my house, we never use jarred sauce. I'll teach you how to make it from scratch. I smiled. I nodded. I told myself she was adjusting. The third week, she started commenting on everything else. You're wearing that to work? She asked one morning, looking at my scrubs like I'd put on a garbage bag. They're scrubs, Karen. It's a hospital. I know what they are. I just think a woman should look put together, even at work. First impressions matter. Brandon was sitting right there at the kitchen table, eating the eggs his mother had made him. The eggs she now made every morning because apparently my scrambled eggs were too dry. He said nothing. By the end of the first month, Karen had taken over the apartment. She controlled the thermostat, set at exactly 74 degrees because she ran cold. She controlled the TV remote, always tuned to her shows. She controlled the grocery list, the cleaning schedule, the laundry routine. And she controlled Brandon. Every decision went through her. What we ate for dinner, when we went to bed, whether we could have friends over. I watched my husband, this man who'd proposed to me with tears in his eyes, transform into a 12-year-old boy who couldn't say no to his mother. Mom thinks we should save more money, he'd say. Translation, Karen thinks I spend too much. Mom thinks you're working too many shifts. Translation, Karen wants me home to cook and clean. Mom thinks we should wait on having kids. Translation, Karen doesn't want to share her son. I tried talking to him about it. One night, after Karen had gone to bed, I sat next to him on the couch and took his hand. Brandon, I love your mom, but this was supposed to be temporary. It's been 2 months. Has she even been looking for apartments? His jaw tightened. She's on a fixed income, Ash. You know how expensive rent is right now. I know, but we're newlyweds. We need our own space, our own life. She's my mother. She has nowhere else to go. I'm not saying kick her out. I'm saying let's help her find a place. I'll even help with the deposit. He pulled his hand away. You sound really selfish right now. That word hit me like a slap. Selfish. I was working 50-hour weeks, paying 60% of the rent because Brandon's salary barely covered his truck payment and the credit card debt he'd failed to mention before we got married. I was coming home to a woman who criticized everything I did, and I was selfish for wanting my own home to feel like mine? I didn't push it. I should have. God, I should have pushed it until something broke. But I loved him, and I was afraid that if I forced the issue, I'd lose him. So I stayed quiet, and Karen stayed put. 3 months turned into 4, then 5, then 6. Her name wasn't on the lease, but you'd never know it. She started getting her mail delivered to our address. She registered to vote using our apartment. She told the neighbors she lived here with her son and his wife, always in that order, her son first, his wife second, like I was an afterthought. One evening in October, I came home from a particularly brutal shift. A teenager had come into the ER after a car accident, and we couldn't save him. I was emotionally wrecked. I just wanted to take a hot shower and crawl into bed. Karen was sitting in the living room with a woman I'd never seen before. "Oh, Ashley, this is my friend Dolores from church. Dolores, this is Brandon's wife." Not Ashley, not my daughter-in-law, Brandon's wife, like a job title. "Nice to meet you," I said, trying to smile. "Dolores is staying for dinner," Karen announced. "I told her you'd make your chicken casserole." I stared at her. I'd been on my feet for 13 hours. I'd watched a 17-year-old die. "Karen, I actually had a really tough day. I was hoping to just—" "It won't take long, dear. The chicken's already thawed." I looked at Brandon, who had just walked in from the kitchen with 2 glasses of sweet tea, one for his mother, one for Dolores. "Babe, can you whip something up?" he said. "Mom already promised." I made the casserole. I served it with a smile. I cleaned the kitchen after everyone ate, and then I went to the bathroom, turned on the shower, sat on the tile floor, and cried until the hot water ran out. That was month 6, and the worst part, I still thought things might get better. I still believed that if I was patient enough, kind enough, accommodating enough, Karen would eventually warm up to me, and Brandon would eventually see what was happening. I was wrong, because what happened 2 weeks later, on a cold November evening, 5 minutes past 7 o'clock, would shatter every illusion I had left. But that part of this story deserves its own chapter. November had settled over Cedar Falls like a gray wool blanket, heavy and suffocating. The kind of cold that seeps into your bones before you even step outside. I remember the date exactly, November 14th, because it was the day everything finally cracked open and I saw my marriage for what it really was. That morning started like any other. I was scheduled for a 7 to 7 shift at Mercy General, 12 hours on the surgical floor. Before I left, Karen was already stationed at the kitchen table in her bathrobe, sipping coffee from the mug she'd claimed as hers, the one I'd gotten as a graduation gift from my nursing program. She'd started using it in month 3, and I'd stopped fighting about it. "I'm making pot roast tonight," she announced without looking up from her phone. "Dinner at 7 sharp. Don't be late." "I'll do my best, Karen. You know how shifts can run over." She looked up then, and there was something in her eyes I hadn't seen before. Not just the usual disapproval, something harder, something calculated. 7 o'clock, Ashley. Not 7:01, not 7:05. 7. Brandon's been working hard all week, and he deserves a nice family dinner without waiting on someone who can't manage her time. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted copper. "I'll be here." Brandon walked in, kissed his mother on the forehead, grabbed a piece of toast, and headed for the door without so much as glancing at me. "Babe," I called after him, "have a good day." "Yeah, you too," he said over his shoulder. The door closed. Karen smiled into her coffee. I drove to work with my hands shaking on the steering wheel, and I told myself it was the cold. The shift was brutal. We had 3 emergency surgeries back to back, a ruptured appendix, a gallbladder that had gone septic, and a 60-year-old man who'd collapsed at a grocery store with internal bleeding. I was assisting doctor Patel in the OR for most of the afternoon, and by 5:30, I was running on adrenaline and vending machine coffee. At 6:15, I texted Brandon. "Wrapping up, should make it by 7. Tell your mom dinner smells amazing. Hopefully, LOL. He didn't respond. At 6:40, just as I was about to clock out, the charge nurse, Linda, grabbed my arm. Ashley, I need you for 5 more minutes. Mr. Brennan in post-op is showing irregular vitals. Can you check before you go? 5 minutes. That's all it was. I checked Mr. Brennan's blood pressure, adjusted his IV drip, flagged the readings for the night nurse, and documented everything in the system. By the time I grabbed my bag and ran to the parking lot, it was 6:52. I drove home 8 miles over the speed limit. I pulled into the apartment complex at 7:03. I sprinted up the stairs because the elevator in our building had been broken since September. I reached our door at 7:05, out of breath, my scrubs damp with sweat despite the cold. I turned the knob. Locked. I knocked. "Hey, it's me. Sorry, I'm just a couple minutes late." Nothing. I knocked again, harder. "Brandon? Karen? Can someone let me in? I forgot my key." That was the other thing. Karen had suggested weeks ago that I leave my spare key on the hook inside the door for safekeeping. I'd done it because I was tired of arguing about every little thing. I heard footsteps. Someone approached the door. I saw the peephole darken as an eye pressed against it from the inside. Then the footsteps walked away. "Karen?" I called, my voice rising. "Karen, I know you're in there. Please open the door." The television volume went up. I pulled out my phone and called Brandon. Straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I texted him. "Your mom locked me out. Please come home or call her." I stood in that hallway for 20 minutes, knocking every few minutes, before I finally slid down against the wall and sat on the floor. My neighbor across the hall, Mrs. Chen, opened her door and peered out. "Ashley, are you okay, honey?" "I'm fine, Mrs. Chen. Just locked out, waiting for Brandon to get home." She gave me a look full of pity and something else. Recognition, maybe. Like she'd been hearing things through the walls that she never wanted to mention. She offered to let me wait in her apartment, but I declined. I kept thinking Brandon would show up any minute. He didn't come home until 11:30. I heard his boots on the stairs, heard him whistling, and I scrambled to my feet. "Brandon, thank God. I've been out here for over 4 hours. He blinked at me, and I caught the faint smell of beer on his breath. He'd been at a bar. While I sat on a concrete floor in a freezing hallway, my husband had been drinking with his buddies. "Why are you out here?" he asked, like it was a genuine mystery. "Your mother locked me out. I was 5 minutes late for dinner, and she locked me out." He sighed, not in sympathy, in annoyance, like I was the problem. "Ash, I told you she takes punctuality seriously. You know that. Why didn't you just leave work on time?" "I was helping a patient, Brandon, a sick, post-operative patient who needed—" "There's always a patient." He unlocked the door and walked in. I followed him, and there was Karen, sitting in the recliner she'd claimed as hers, watching television like nothing had happened. "Hi, sweetheart," she said to Brandon. "There's pot roast in the fridge." "Thanks, Mom." She didn't look at me. Not once. "Karen," I said, and my voice was trembling, but I didn't care anymore. "You locked me out of my own apartment for 4.5 hours. She finally turned her head, her expression as placid as a lake. "The door was locked at 7 like it always is. If you'd been home on time, there wouldn't have been a problem." "I was 5 minutes late." Punctuality is a sign of respect, Ashley. I raised Brandon to understand that. I turned to my husband. "Brandon, say something." He was standing at the kitchen counter, forking cold pot roast straight from the Tupperware. He chewed, swallowed, and shrugged. "She's got a point, Ash. We agreed on 7. Something cracked inside me. Not broke, cracked. Like a windshield hit by a pebble on the highway, a tiny fracture that spreads in every direction if you don't fix it. "I'm your wife," I whispered. "Doesn't that mean anything?" Brandon put down the fork. For one moment, one fraction of a second, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Guilt, maybe. Or the ghost of the man who'd knelt on that bridge and asked me to spend my life with him. But then Karen cleared her throat from the living room, and whatever it was disappeared. "Let's just go to bed," he said. "It's late." We went to bed. He fell asleep in minutes. I lay awake until 4 a.m., staring at the ceiling, listening to Karen snoring through the wall. The next morning, I made a decision. Not the big decision. That came later. This was a smaller one, but it felt huge at the time. I decided to talk to someone. I called my best friend Megan on my lunch break. She did what? Megan's voice was so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. Locked me out for being 5 minutes late. Ashley, that's insane. That's actually insane. And Brandon just let it happen? He said she had a point. Silence on the line. Then Megan spoke, carefully, like she was choosing every word. Ash, listen to me. I love you. You know I love you. But what you're describing isn't a mother-in-law problem. It's a husband problem. Brandon is choosing her over you every single time, and you keep letting him. He loves me, Meg. He's just caught in the middle. There is no middle. You're his wife. You're supposed to be his priority. Has he ever, even once, told his mother to back off? I opened my mouth to answer and realized I couldn't think of a single example. I thought so, Megan said quietly. That conversation haunted me for days. But here's the thing about hope. It's stubborn. It clings to you even when every piece of evidence says let go. And 2 days later, something happened that made me think maybe, just maybe, things were about to change. Brandon came home from work with flowers. Not the gas station carnations he'd grabbed a few times before, real flowers. 12 yellow roses from the nice florist on Main Street, wrapped in brown paper with a ribbon. These are for you, he said, and he looked almost nervous. I've been thinking about what happened, and I'm sorry. You're right. Mom went too far. I should have said something. My heart nearly burst. I threw my arms around his neck and buried my face in his shoulder. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. Thank you, I said. That's all I needed to hear. I'm going to talk to her, he said. Set some boundaries. This is our home and she needs to respect that. Really? Really, I promise. I believed him. God help me, I believed every word. That night, I heard them talking in the kitchen after I'd gone to bed. I couldn't make out every word, but I heard Brandon's voice, firm and steady, and Karen's voice, rising and falling. At one point, I heard her say, after everything I sacrificed for you, and I heard him say, Mom, she's my wife. I fell asleep smiling. The next morning, Karen was different. She said good morning to me. She didn't comment on my scrubs. She even offered to pour me coffee. I nearly dropped the mug in shock. Brandon talked to me, she said stiffly, not meeting my eyes. I suppose I've been a bit overbearing. I'll try to do better. Thank you, Karen. That really means a lot. For 3 days, it was like living in a different apartment. Karen kept to her room more. She didn't criticize my cooking. She let me control the TV remote one evening without a single comment. Brandon was more attentive, too. He held my hand on the couch. He asked about my day. He kissed me goodbye in the morning. I called Megan on day 3, practically giddy. He actually did it. He talked to her. Things are so much better. I'll believe it when it lasts a month, Megan said. But even she sounded cautiously hopeful. It lasted 4 days. On the 5th day, I came home to find Karen and Brandon sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of papers between them. They both looked up when I walked in, and there was something in their expressions, a shared look, a private understanding, that made my stomach drop. What's going on? I asked, setting my bag on the counter. Brandon cleared his throat. So, Mom and I have been talking, and we think it makes sense for her to stay long-term. Permanently. Permanently, I repeated. The rent market is impossible right now, Ash. A 1-bedroom in Cedar Falls is going for $900 a month minimum. She can't afford that on Social Security. We discussed this, Brandon. You said you'd help her find a place. You said you'd set boundaries. Karen folded her hands on the table. Brandon and I have come to an arrangement. I'll contribute $300 a month toward groceries and utilities. In exchange, I'll stay in the guest room permanently. It's the most practical solution. I looked at the papers on the table. They'd already drafted a budget. Karen's handwriting, neat and precise, listing expenses in 2 columns. My salary was in 1 column, broken down to the cent. Brandon's was in the other. At the bottom, in red ink, Karen had written, Ashley's contribution, 62%. Brandon's contribution, 28%. Karen's contribution, 10%. She'd calculated exactly how much of this household I was funding, and she'd assigned herself the smallest possible share while making herself a permanent resident. "You planned this," I said, my voice hollow. "The flowers, the apology, the 3 nice days. It was all so I'd be softened up for this." Brandon's face flushed. It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like, Brandon? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you and your mother just decided my future without asking me." Karen stood up from the table. "I think you're being dramatic, Ashley. This is a family decision, and I am family." "So am I!" My voice cracked on the last word, and I hated myself for it. "So am I, Karen. I am his family. I am his wife. And you two just sit here and plan my life like I'm a tenant in my own home?" Brandon reached for my hand. "Ash, calm down." "Don't tell me to calm down. She's my mother. What do you want me to do, throw her out on the street? I want you to choose me." The words erupted before I could stop them, raw and desperate. "Just once, Brandon. Just one time. Choose me." The silence that followed was devastating. Brandon looked at me, then looked at his mother, and in that pause, that tiny, damning hesitation, I had my answer. Karen picked up the papers from the table and tapped them into a neat stack. "I'll give you two some privacy," she said, and walked to her room. Her room, not the guest room anymore. Brandon ran both hands through his hair. "You're putting me in an impossible position." "No," I said, "you're putting yourself there." I slept on the couch that night, not because anyone made me, because I couldn't stand to lie next to him. I lay there in the dark, staring at Karen's porcelain cats on the shelf, their glassy eyes catching the streetlight through the window, and I thought about what Megan had said. This isn't a mother-in-law problem, it's a husband problem. I was starting to understand, but understanding and acting are two very different things, and I wasn't ready yet. I still had one more illusion to lose, one more betrayal waiting for me, the kind that doesn't just crack a windshield, but shatters it into 1,000 pieces. And it was coming in exactly 11 days, on Thanksgiving, at a table set for 12, when I would discover that the woman I'd been trying so hard to please had been working behind my back to destroy my marriage from the very beginning. Thanksgiving. The word used to mean something warm to me. Growing up, it was the one day a year my mom would take off both jobs and we'd cook together in our tiny kitchen, making a turkey that was always slightly overcooked and stuffing from a box and a pumpkin pie from the grocery store bakery. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours. I carried that feeling with me into adulthood, the belief that Thanksgiving was sacred, a day for gratitude and family and love. Karen had been planning this Thanksgiving for weeks. She'd invited Brandon's Aunt Patricia, his Uncle Dave, their 3 adult kids, cousins I'd met exactly once at the wedding, and a few of Karen's church friends, including Dolores. 12 people total, crammed into our 2-bedroom apartment, and Karen had appointed herself executive producer of the entire event. She gave me a list, a physical, handwritten list on yellow legal pad paper, itemized and numbered, of everything I was responsible for. 2 pies, pumpkin and pecan, a green bean casserole, mashed potatoes, dinner rolls, and general cleanup before, during, and after. Her contribution? The turkey. Brandon's contribution? Picking up folding chairs from his buddy Marcus. I worked a half shift on Thanksgiving morning, 6 a.m. to noon, because the hospital doesn't close for holidays, and someone has to be there. I'd prepped the pies the night before, and I got home at 12:30 with just enough time to shower, change, and start on the sides. Guests were arriving at 3. When I walked in, the apartment smelled like roasting turkey and something else. Perfume. Karen's perfume. Thick and floral, the kind that announces a woman before she enters a room. She was in the kitchen, wearing a dress I'd never seen before, full makeup, hair set in curls. "You're late," she said. "I'm not late. Guests come at 3. I needed you here at noon to start the potatoes." I didn't argue. I showered in 4 minutes, threw on the one nice dress I owned, a burgundy wrap dress I'd bought at TJ Maxx for $22, and got to work in the kitchen. For the next 2 hours, Karen and I moved around each other in tense silence. The only sounds, the sizzle of butter in pans and the scrape of a peeler against potato skin. Guests started arriving at 3. Aunt Patricia was a loud woman with big earrings and a bigger laugh. Uncle Dave was quiet, the kind of man who nurses one beer all night. The cousins, Tyler, Jake, and Brittany, were polite but distant. Dolores arrived with a Jell-O mold that nobody would eat. Dinner was served at 4. The table looked beautiful. I'll give Karen that. She'd bought a tablecloth, real cloth napkins, even a little cornucopia centerpiece from Hobby Lobby. 12 place settings, and I noticed mine was at the far end, squeezed between Dolores and the wall, while Karen sat at the head of the table like a queen presiding over her court. Brandon carved the turkey. Everyone clapped. Karen beamed. For a few minutes, it almost felt normal. Then Patricia said something that changed everything. "So Karen, Brandon tells me you're staying here permanently now. That's wonderful. Must be so nice to have family close." I set down my fork. I looked at Brandon. He was staring at his plate. "When did you tell her that?" I asked quietly. Brandon didn't answer. Karen did. "I mentioned it to Patricia last week. It's not a secret, Ashley. We discussed this." "We didn't discuss it. You and Brandon decided it. I never agreed." The table went silent. 12 people, forks frozen midair, eyes darting between me and Karen like spectators at a tennis match. Patricia cleared her throat. "Oh, I didn't mean to cause any—" "You didn't," Karen said smoothly. "Ashley's just a little sensitive about the living arrangements. She works long hours and sometimes gets overwhelmed. Isn't that right, dear?" She was doing it. Right there, in front of everyone, she was painting me as the unstable one, the difficult one, the wife who couldn't handle a simple family dinner without making a scene. "That's not what this is about," I said, my voice shaking. Brandon finally spoke. "Ash, can we not do this right now? It's Thanksgiving." "You're right," I said. "It is Thanksgiving. And I'm thankful for honesty, which seems to be in short supply at this table." Karen's eyes narrowed. Just a fraction, just enough for me to see. Then she smiled and turned to Dolores. "Have you tried Ashley's green bean casserole?" She used canned mushroom soup. I usually make my own cream sauce, but Ashley prefers the shortcut. Laughter. Polite, uncomfortable laughter from people who didn't know what else to do. I felt my face burn. I picked up my fork and ate in silence for the rest of the meal. After dinner, while I was washing dishes, alone of course, Brittany came into the kitchen. She was the youngest cousin, maybe 23, with kind eyes and a nose ring. "Hey," she said, grabbing a dish towel. "I'll dry." "You don't have to." "I want to." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "My mom does the same thing to my dad's new wife. The control thing, the comments. It's like a playbook." I stopped scrubbing. "What do you mean?" "I mean, Karen's not just difficult, Ashley. She's strategic. She did this with Brandon's last girlfriend, too." My blood went cold. "What last girlfriend?" Brittany's eyes widened. "He didn't tell you? Brandon was with someone for 3 years before you, Rachel. They were engaged." The plate in my hand slipped. I caught it before it hit the sink, but barely. "Karen drove her out," Brittany continued, her voice low. "Same exact pattern. Moved in, took over, turned Brandon against her. Rachel lasted about a year after Karen moved in. Then she left. Karen threw a party when she was gone. An actual party. I was there. I couldn't breathe. I literally could not get air into my lungs. I gripped the edge of the counter and forced myself to inhale. "Why are you telling me this?" I whispered. "Because nobody told Rachel, and she thought she was going crazy. You deserve to know what you're dealing with." Brittany squeezed my shoulder and walked back to the living room. I stood at that sink with my hands in greasy water, and the last illusion I had shattered around me, like those porcelain cats falling off a shelf. Karen wasn't adjusting. Karen wasn't overbearing. Karen was executing a plan she'd used before, a systematic campaign to isolate Brandon from any woman who threatened her position. And my husband, the man who'd promised me forever on a bridge over the Cedar River, was either too blind or too weak to see it. That night, after everyone left, I locked myself in the bathroom and Googled enmeshment, emotional incest, covert narcissist mother-in-law. I read for 2 hours. Every article, every forum post, every Reddit thread described my life with surgical precision. The guilt trips, the triangulation, the way she positioned herself as the victim whenever I set a boundary, the way Brandon always chose her comfort over mine. I found a thread from a woman named Rachel_M_2019 on a support forum for people with toxic in-laws. The post was from 4 years ago. She described a boyfriend whose mother moved in and systematically destroyed the relationship. She described the same apartment complex on Maple Drive. She described Brandon by everything but name. The last line of her post read, "If you're the next girl, run. Don't walk, run." I sat on that bathroom floor until my legs went numb. When I came out, Brandon was already asleep, and Karen's light was off. The apartment was dark and quiet, and I felt more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. More alone than all those nights my mom worked doubles and I heated up ramen in an empty kitchen at age 10. The next 2 weeks were the darkest of my life. I moved through the days like a ghost. Drive to work, treat patients, drive home, endure Karen, lie next to Brandon, stare at the ceiling, repeat. I stopped calling Megan because I was ashamed. I stopped eating regular meals because the kitchen felt like enemy territory. I lost 7 pounds in 11 days. Karen noticed. Of course she noticed. "You're looking thin, Ashley. Are you eating enough? I worry about you." She said this in front of Brandon, performing concern like an actress hitting her mark. Brandon looked at me with mild interest, the way you'd look at a coworker who mentioned they had a cold. "I'm fine," I said. I wasn't fine. I was drowning, and the water was rising. December 2nd. That was the night I ended up in the hallway. The night I started this story with. The pot roast, the locked door, the cold concrete, Brandon's laugh on the phone. You already know what happened, but what you don't know is what happened in my head while I sat on that floor. At first, I cried. Silent, heaving sobs that I muffled with my sleeve so the neighbors wouldn't hear. Then the crying stopped, and something else took its place. Not anger, not yet. Clarity. Like a fog lifting off a road, and suddenly you can see for miles. I pulled out my phone, 3% battery now, and opened the calculator app. I started doing math. My salary, $52,000 a year before taxes. My share of rent, $810 a month. My student loan payment, $487 a month. My car payment, $275. Insurance, gas, groceries, the extra I kicked in for utilities because Karen kept the thermostat at 74. I was spending almost everything I earned keeping this household running, and in return, I got a locked door and a husband who told me to sleep in my car. Then I did different math. First month's rent on a studio apartment, around $700 in Cedar Falls. Security deposit, $700. I had $3,200 in my personal savings account, the one I'd kept separate because my mom always told me, "Baby, never let anyone control all your money." I could afford to leave. I could afford to leave today. That realization hit me like electricity. I sat up straighter, my spine pressed against that cold door, and I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Power. At 2:14 a.m., my phone died. I sat in the dark for another hour, but I wasn't crying anymore. I was planning. Every detail, every step, every phone call I'd need to make. By the time the first gray light of dawn crept through the hallway window, I had a plan so clear it felt like architecture, like something with load-bearing walls and a foundation that wouldn't crack. At 6 a.m., Mrs. Chen's door opened. She was heading to her morning Tai Chi class at the community center, same as every day. She saw me on the floor and her hand flew to her mouth. "Ashley, you've been here all night?" "Mrs. Chen," I said, and my voice was calm, eerily calm, even to my own ears. "Can I use your phone? And can I ask you something important?" She brought me inside. She made me tea. She handed me her phone. And then I asked her the question that would set everything in motion. You've lived across from us for 7 months. You hear things through these walls. If I ever needed someone to confirm what goes on in that apartment, the yelling, the way Karen treats me, the night I was locked out, would you be willing to say what you've seen? Mrs. Chen set down her teacup. She looked at me for a long moment, and then she said 5 words that changed the trajectory of my entire life. I've been waiting for you to ask. She opened a drawer in her kitchen and pulled out a notebook. Dates, times, descriptions. Mrs. Chen had been documenting everything, every argument she'd heard through the walls, every time she'd seen me crying in the hallway, the night Karen screamed at me for using the wrong dish soap. Pages and pages in neat handwriting going back to month 2. My first husband's mother was the same, she said quietly. I recognized the pattern. I didn't want to interfere, but I wanted you to have evidence if you ever needed it. I held that notebook in my hands and felt tears rolling down my cheeks, not from sadness this time, but from the overwhelming realization that someone had seen me. Someone had witnessed my pain and thought I mattered enough to write it down. I made 3 phone calls from Mrs. Chen's apartment that morning. The first was to Megan. I need your help. I'm leaving today. She didn't ask questions. She said, I'll be there in 20 minutes with my SUV. The second was to the apartment management office. I asked one question. If one tenant on a joint lease wants to remove their name, what's the process? The answer was simple. Written notice, 30 days, and my financial obligation would end. The third call was to a number I'd found during those 2 hours on the bathroom floor after Thanksgiving. A family law attorney named Diana Reeves, whose office opened at 8 a.m. and who, according to 47 Google reviews, specialized in exactly one thing: getting women out of marriages they should have left a long time ago. I need a consultation, I told her voicemail, today if possible. My name is Ashley Holloway, and I'm done being a guest in my own life. I hung up, handed Mrs. Chen her phone, and looked at the clock. 6:47 a.m. Brandon's alarm would go off at 7. Karen would start her coffee at 7:15. By 8 o'clock, they'd both be sitting in that kitchen, comfortable and oblivious, assuming I'd crawled back in through some window of submission like I always did. They had no idea what was coming. And for the first time in 7 months, the thought of walking through that front door didn't fill me with dread. It filled me with fire. I thanked Mrs. Chen one more time, tucked her notebook into the waistband of my scrubs, and stepped into the hallway. It was 6:52 a.m. Across the hall, behind my own front door, I could hear the coffee maker gurgling to life on its automatic timer. Karen's timer. Karen's coffee. Karen's kitchen. Not for long. Megan pulled up at 7:10 in her black Chevy Equinox, engine running, hazard lights on. She didn't even come upstairs first. She texted me, I'm here, tell me what you need. I texted back, 20 minutes, keep the car running. I used Mrs. Chen's spare key trick. The building superintendent, a guy named Roy who'd always been kind to me, let me in through the service entrance so I could access the apartment from the back hallway without passing through the living room. I'd helped Roy's wife with her insulin dosing questions for free last summer. He didn't ask why I needed the back door. He just opened it. I moved fast. I had a mental list, prioritized, like triage. Documents first: my passport, social security card, birth certificate, nursing license, the marriage certificate. I grabbed them from the filing cabinet in the bedroom closet while Brandon snored 3 feet away. Then clothes, 2 duffel bags, enough for a week, toiletries, my laptop, the framed photo of my mother that sat on my nightstand, the only thing in that apartment that was truly mine. I was in and out in 14 minutes. Brandon never stirred. Karen's door stayed closed. I loaded everything into Megan's SUV and climbed into the passenger seat. My hands were shaking, but my mind was glass clear. Where to? Megan asked. The Comfort Inn on Route 20, then Diana Reeves' office at 8. Megan drove. I stared out the window and watched Cedar Falls slide past in the gray December morning, and I felt something I can only describe as weightlessness. like I'd been carrying a boulder up a hill for 7 months, and someone had finally said, "You can put that down now." Diana Reeves' office was on the second floor of a brick building downtown, above a sandwich shop. She was already there when I arrived at 8:03, a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. Her handshake was firm, her eyes were sharp. She gestured to a chair, and I sat down and told her everything. She listened without interrupting for 22 minutes. When I finished, she took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. "Ashley, I want to be direct with you. What you're describing, the isolation, the financial control, the locked door, this qualifies as domestic abuse under Iowa law. Not just from Karen, from Brandon too, by enabling it." I flinched at the word abuse. I'd been calling it difficult, overbearing, challenging. Hearing a lawyer name it for what it was felt like getting punched in a wound I didn't know I had. "Here's what we're going to do," Diana continued. "First, I'm filing a petition for dissolution of marriage. Iowa has a 90-day waiting period. No way around that. Second, you're going to give written notice to your apartment management that you're removing yourself from the lease effective 30 days. Third, and this is important, we're going to document everything. The locked door incident, the pattern of control, your neighbor's records." She tapped Mrs. Chen's notebook, which I'd placed on her desk. "This," she said, "is gold." I signed the retainer agreement, $1,500. It wiped out almost half my savings, but Diana said she'd work with me on a payment plan for the rest. By 10 a.m., I'd filed written notice with the apartment complex. By 11, Megan had helped me set up the hotel room with my 2 duffel bags and my laptop. By noon, I'd called Mercy General's HR department and updated my address. My phone had been charging since I got to the hotel. At 12:15, it lit up with 17 missed calls, 14 from Brandon, 3 from Karen, and a string of texts that told me everything I needed to know about how my morning absence had landed. Brandon, 8:47 a.m. "Where are you? Your stuff is gone." Brandon, 9:03 a.m. "Ash, this isn't funny. Call me." Brandon, 9:15 a.m. "Mom is freaking out. Where did you go?" Brandon, 9:22 a.m. "Did you seriously leave?" Karen, 9:30 a.m. "Ashley, whatever tantrum you're throwing, it needs to stop. Come home immediately." Brandon, 9:41 a.m. "I'm calling the police." Brandon, 10:02 a.m. "Police said you're an adult and they can't do anything. Ashley, please call me." Karen, 10:15 a.m. "This is incredibly selfish and immature. Brandon is devastated." Brandon, 11:30 a.m. "I don't understand. What did I do?" That last one almost broke me. What did I do? Like he genuinely didn't know. Like sleeping in a hallway was something that happened to me, not something he caused. I typed back one message. "You'll be hearing from my attorney. Please don't contact me again." Then I blocked both numbers. The next 3 months were the hardest and the most liberating of my life. I stayed at the Comfort Inn for 9 days until I found a studio apartment on Birch Street, $685 a month, first floor, tiny kitchen, just enough room for a bed and a desk. My desk, the one Brandon had carried to storage. I got it back. Roy helped me retrieve it from the basement one evening after Brandon and Karen were out. Diana Reeves was a force of nature. She filed the dissolution petition on December 5th. Brandon was served at the apartment on December 8th. Megan told me later, she'd heard from Marcus's girlfriend, that Brandon stood in the doorway holding the papers with his mouth open like a fish, and Karen had to physically take them from his hands. He tried to fight it. Of course he did. Karen found him a lawyer, some guy named Phil from her church, who charged $200 an hour and mostly handled property disputes. Phil tried to argue that I'd abandoned the marital home. Diana responded with Mrs. Chen's notebook, my written testimony, and a detailed log of the night I was locked out, including the call records showing my 11 unanswered calls to Brandon. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Whitfield, reviewed the evidence during the preliminary hearing in January. She looked at Brandon over her reading glasses and said, "Mr. Holloway, your wife was locked out of her own residence, And your response was to tell her to sleep in her car? Is that accurate? Brandon looked at Phil. Phil looked at the table. It was a misunderstanding, Brandon mumbled. A misunderstanding, Judge Whitfield repeated flatly. She made a note. That note became part of the record that ensured the divorce settlement went in my favor. Because here's the thing about Iowa divorce law that Karen and her church lawyer didn't anticipate. When one spouse can demonstrate a pattern of emotional abuse and constructive eviction from the marital home, the court takes it seriously. Diana argued that Karen's presence constituted an unreasonable living condition that Brandon refused to address, and that the locked door incident was the culmination of months of systematic mistreatment. The final hearing was in March. Brandon showed up in his navy suit, the same one he'd worn to our wedding, borrowed from Marcus. Karen was in the gallery, arms crossed, glaring at me with enough venom to kill a horse. Diana presented everything. Mrs. Chen testified by video deposition. She was calm, precise, devastating. She described the night she found me on the hallway floor at 6 a.m. She described the arguments she'd heard through the walls. She described Karen's voice screaming that I was ungrateful and not good enough for her son. Then Diana played her final card. She'd found Rachel. Brandon's ex-fiancée, the woman Brittany had told me about at Thanksgiving. Rachel had agreed to submit a written statement describing her identical experience with Karen, the move-in, the takeover, the systematic destruction of the relationship. She described it in terms so similar to mine that Judge Whitfield actually paused her reading to look up at Brandon with an expression I can only describe as disgust. "This is a pattern," Diana said. "Not a one-time conflict, a pattern." Karen stood up in the gallery. "That woman is a liar. Rachel was unstable. Ma'am, sit down or I'll have you removed," Judge Whitfield said. Karen sat. The divorce was finalized on March 15th. I got out clean. No alimony either way. The credit card debt, $11,400 that Brandon had accumulated, most of it before our marriage, stayed with him. My student loans stayed with me. The only shared asset was a joint savings account with $847 in it. Diana got me $424. I didn't care about the money. I cared about the piece of paper that said I was free. After the hearing, I walked out of the courthouse into the March sunshine. The air was cold, but the sky was that impossible Iowa blue, the kind that stretches forever. Megan was waiting on the steps. "How do you feel?" she asked. Like I just woke up from a 7-month coma. She hugged me so hard my ribs hurt. I was loading my bag into Megan's car when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, and there was Brandon, standing on the courthouse sidewalk, his suit wrinkled, his eyes red. "Ash," he said, "can we talk, just for a minute?" I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since December. He looked older, thinner. There were dark circles under his eyes. Behind him, through the courthouse doors, I could see Karen gathering her purse, her face like stone. "There's nothing to talk about, Brandon. I miss you. I know I messed up. Mom, she gets in my head and She doesn't get in your head. She lives there. She's lived there your whole life. And until you deal with that, you're going to do this to every woman who loves you." His eyes filled with tears. "I can change. Maybe, but not for me. Not anymore." I turned and got in the car. Megan pulled away from the curb. In the side mirror, I watched Brandon standing there, shrinking, until we turned the corner and he disappeared. That was 7 months ago. I'm writing this from my studio on Birch Street, sitting at my desk, the one Karen tried to banish. There's a cup of coffee next to me, my brand, in my mug, the nursing school graduation one I took back. My mother's photo is on the windowsill where the morning light hits it. I'm still at Mercy General. I got promoted to charge nurse last month, Linda's old position. My student loans are down to $38,000. My credit score is 741. I eat when I'm hungry, sleep when I'm tired, and no one tells me my scrambled eggs are too dry. Last week, Mrs. Chen texted me a photo from the hallway of our old building, a moving truck outside, Karen's porcelain cats in a box by the door, a for rent sign on the apartment. Brandon couldn't make the payments alone. They were both out. I stared at that photo for a long time. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel vindication. I felt something quieter than that, a stillness, like the surface of the Cedar River on a windless morning. My mom called me last night. She's 62 now, finally retired, living in a little house in Des Moines that I helped pay for. She asked how I was doing, and I told her the truth. "I'm good, Mom. I'm really good." "Baby," she said, "I'm proud of you. Not because you left, because you remembered you were worth leaving for." I hung up and sat in the silence of my own apartment, in my own space, breathing my own air. And I thought about that night on the hallway floor, the cold concrete, the locked door, my phone dying in my hand. I thought about the woman I was then, exhausted, humiliated, curled up like something discarded. She made the best decision of her life on the worst night of her life. And if she could do it, so can you. Never sleep in a hallway when your name is on the lease. And never let anyone, not a husband, not a mother-in-law, not anyone, convince you that love means shrinking yourself small enough to fit inside someone else's house rules. You deserve a door that opens when you come home. Make sure you're the one holding the key.